For me, to say it when Mark Brearley's worked, a good city has everything. So in a city you also need productive activities, you need economy included and visible, and you have to be able to experience it. And this is this is for employment, to have all categories of employment in your city, to have all have a possibility of short mobility routes between what is produced and what is consumed, but also to have not to separate all functions in different ways, because then it's you don't have a city, you have a group of suburbs. I think for me what is very specific about Brussels and urban production is that when they were discussing the Place Démographique, it was looking for new space for housing, and I don't know what happened exactly, but as one of the few and one of the first European cities, they realized that they couldn't kick out all industry, because then at least they would have a very big unemployment problem. So the 20% would turn into 25% of unemployment, and so the social imbalance in the city between rich people that work there and poor people that live there would become much, much bigger. So I think that's, to me, as I understood it, that's the circumstances that produced the interest in production in the city. And at the same time, if you move it outside, then it goes to a different region, so you lose revenue and you produce more mobility because goods have to go in the city and back out again. So I think that's one of the reasons why in Brussels with the first CEMU was something that no one else was doing in Europe at that time. So I think it's a unique position, but due to the limited territory. For what we've been studying in Brussels and Flanders, the future for urban economy and economy as a whole thing is that we still need monofunctional industrial or economic zones, because a lot of economy can't function if it's mixed with housing. Next to that, you have to every economic activity that can be mixed with housing, we should try and do this, because there's not enough space to do everything in a very dispersed way. So that's why I think at the same time you need densification of industrial sites, as there will be a scarcity there. There will be not enough industrial space probably within a few years, so prices will go up, and in that way we should try and make sure that we have all the designs and the ideas available to go what is multi-story industrial, how to cope with fire regulations if we do new multi-story industrial buildings, and at the same time what is already happening in the CEMU and in the mixed fabric is to further explore how you can mix and what are the experience in the new mixed-use buildings. For the high land price or rent price for productive activities, I think there's a double position. At one hand, if you want to densify your city and the city is growing, then industries will have to pay a higher price. So you need the high price to be able to get multi-story industrial as a viable product, because for nowadays it's not something you can do without subsidies. So there's a bit of a trade-off, and at some point people will move to cheaper locations if they really need it. But that's also it's also a question whether you incorporate your externalities within your company or not, because if you're somewhere near Charleroi or in Limburg on a large, only by car accessible industrial estate, that's something that will also have its limits. So maybe when road pricing also adds other costs to sites that are outside the city, then it will be more logic to pay a more correct price to inner city sites. But I think it's something, while we're in the transition, we have to be very careful what we do want, because if it's too expensive, you might kick out companies and they will not return. So the whole pricing things are very difficult to look at the equilibrium. But talking about industry and productive things in the city, for me it also means that you have to accept how it looks. And of course you can make it in a better way, like the Village des Matériaux. It's a nice shed, but it's still a very simple, straightforward shed to get building material in. And it's a big thing. And so there's a lot of confusion, but also a lot of work to be done to really understand what you can do as a designer with very basic industrial materials, to not camouflage a big building or an open air exploitation, but to emphasize the good things. And so, yeah, I think historically there are a lot of examples where, for instance, the color of the Audi factory, it's a bit weird to say the least, but you could imagine with for instance with Audi at Forêt, you could do a lot of nice things with how they operate if they were willing to share a bit. You could have a big screen showing what happens in the factory. Sometimes they do bits with an open door, and you could almost have an approach like the airport has with the plane spotters, to have a place where you could see what happens inside. And maybe that won't work with Audi, but it could also be an approach where you engage with something that no one will be allowed in the factory because it's too dangerous, but you could have some relationship, or at least you could have a different design of the outside of a building. And that's where I think from historic buildings we accept a lot of things. So the whole Hôtel de Ville is completely a blank wall on the ground floor, except for the front, but everything, there's almost no doors, there's no windows. But once it is an industrial building, and they can be nice designed 50s or 60s buildings, then someone has a problem with the fact that it's a blind wall. And I think the blankness and the big size are things that we, as designers and urban planners, have to be able to embrace and to allow it to be what it is. And at the same time saying, yes, you can be what you are, but in an urban environment. And that's not trying to camouflage it with green, but to look at the potential to have exchange. And I think luckily there are some good examples of these combinations already built in Brussels. At the same time, from an educational point of view, I think there is a real need for both with geographers, sociologists, and especially designers to have some knowledge or a real feeling with what doing production, having a company, what it really means, and what the boundaries are of things.